Hello students and welcome to your English language class. I hope you all are doing good. Now in today's video we will be reading the first story of your supplementary reader, Footprints Without Feet. Now the title of the story is A Triumph of Surgery. Now first of all, let us know about the main characters of the story. First we have James Herriot. He is the author of the story and also a veterinary surgeon. Second, we have Mrs. Pumphrey, who's a very rich lady and also the mistress of Tricky. And who's Tricky? Tricky is the dog who is very lethargic and lazy. And he's over-pampered by Mrs. Pumphrey. Now, A Triumph of Surgery is a story of Tricky, an over-pampered and overfed dog. His mistress, Mrs. Pumphrey, dotes on him and feeds him all the unhealthy food he likes. The dog becomes fat like a bloated sausage and lethargic. Our narrator, who is a veterinary surgeon, cures the dog with exercise and healthy diet. The story focuses on how excess of everything is bad and how pampering can lead to disaster. Though presented in a light and humorous way, the story brings to light how some people, ignorant of the healthy way to groom their pets, spoil their health. Now the word triumph means victory. So this is the story about a victory of surgery. Now let us read the story. I was really worried about Tricky this time. I had pulled up my car when I saw him in the street with his mistress, and I was shocked at his appearance. Now the author or the narrator of the story, James Herriot, is saying that he was really worried about Tricky, who's a dog. I had pulled up my car when I saw him in the street with his mistress. Mistress is the feminine gender of the word master. So Mrs. Pumphrey is the mistress of the dog Tricky, and our narrator was shocked to see the appearance of Tricky. Now, as he is a veterinary doctor, so he cares about animals, and that's why he became concerned about Tricky when he saw him in the street with his mistress. He had become hugely fat like a bloated sausage. Now, bloated means swollen, and sausage means finely chopped meat stuffed into long cylindrical cases. Now, he was looking like a bloated sausage or a swollen sausage with a leg at each corner. His eyes, bloodshot and rheumy. Rheumy means watery. Stared straight ahead and his tongue lolled from his jaws. Now, he was very much concerned and very much worried because the appearance of the dog was not well. Now, Mrs. Pumphrey hastened to explain. Means she quickly explained that he was so listless. Listless means lethargic or lazy and lacks energy. Mr. Herriot, he seemed to have no energy. I thought he must be suffering from malnutrition, so I have been giving him some little extras between meals to build him up. Some malt and cod liver oil and a bowl of Horlicks at night to make him sleep. Nothing much really. So now we can see that Mrs. Pumphrey thinks that her dog is malnourished or lacks nutrition. So she is feeding him a lot of things like malt, cod liver oil, Horlicks, etc. And she thinks that's not much. And did you cut down on the sweet things as I told you? Now, Mr. Herriot says, did you stop giving sweet things as I have told you? Oh, I did for a bit, but he seemed to be so weak I had to relent. Relent means to give up. Means she thought that her dog has become very weak, so she started giving him sweets. He does love cream cakes and chocolate soup. I can't bear to refuse him. The dog loves cream cakes and chocolates, so his mistress, Mrs. Pumphrey, couldn't refuse all those things to him. I looked down again at the little dog. That was the trouble. Tricky's only fault was greed. He had never been to refuse food. Means whatever he's demanding or whatever he's liking, his mistress is giving him that only. So he has become a little greedy. He would tackle a meal at any hour of the day or night. Means whenever, whatever the time of the day, if you give him food, he'll eat it up. And I wondered about all the things Mrs. Pumphrey hadn't mentioned. And our narrator was also thinking that she has only mentioned a few things and she must be giving a lot of things to him. Are you giving him plenty of exercise? Well, he has his little walks with me, as you can see, but Hodgkin, the gardener, has been down with lumbago. Now, what do you mean by lumbago? It's a lower body pain. So there has been no ring throwing lately. So that's the only exercise that the dog does. He takes little walks, and earlier he used to play with the gardener. The ring throwing thing means the gardener must be throwing ring and the dog Tricky the gardener. But that also has stopped because the gardener is down with lumbago or the lower body pain. So Tricky is not doing any exercise lately. So that could be also the reason that why he's become so fat and lethargic, because all the exercise has stopped and all the time he's being fed and he's being over pampered by his mistress, Mrs. Pumphrey. Now you see, students, all the pets need a lot of exercise. They need to play, and if they don't get to play, they'll start feeling sick. So that's all what is happening with our dog Tricky here. Let us read the second page of the story. I tried to sound severe. Severe means intense or serious. Now, who tried to sound severe? Mr. Harriet. Now I really mean this. If you don't cut his food right down and give him more exercise, he is going to be really ill. You must harden your heart and keep him on a very strict diet. Now, being the doctor, he is advising Mrs. Pumphrey to take proper care of his diet and his exercise. Otherwise, he may fall ill. Mrs. Pumphrey wrung her hands. Wrung her hands means squeezed or twisted lightly. Her hands. Oh, I will, Mr. Harriet. I'm sure you are right, but it is so difficult, so very difficult. And she set off, head down along the road as if determined to put the new regime into practice immediately. Regime means routine. Now, she was determined that she won't let the dog fall ill and she'll put a new routine for the dog. I watched their progress with growing concern. Tricky was tottering along in his little tweed coat. Now, I saw him, Mr. Harriet was watching them as they were walking on the road. Tricky was taking little steps or weak steps along in his little tweed. Tweed means coarse woolen fabric coat. He was wearing a coat because it was cold. Now he had a whole wardrobe of these coats for the cold weather and a raincoat for the wet days. He struggled on. As he was walking, he was struggling, drooping in his harness. He was sinking in the strap, which Mrs. Pumphrey was holding in her hand. I thought it wouldn't be long before I heard from Mrs. Pumphrey, because he was about to fall ill, that's for sure. Looking at his condition, Mr. Harriet was sure that sooner he will be getting a call from Mrs. Pumphrey about within a few days. Mrs. Pumphrey was distraught. Distraught means upset. Tricky would eat nothing, refused even his favorite dishes, and besides, he had bouts of vomiting. Now, as expected, Tricky's health was deteriorating and he started vomiting and he's not eating at all. He spent all his time lying on a rug or a carpet, panting. Panting means you must have seen the dogs, how they take quick breaths. Didn't want to go for walks, didn't want to do anything. I had made my plans in advance. The only way was to get Tricky out of the house for a period. Now Mr. Harriet knew that the dog won't be able to recover if he stays in the house with Mrs. Pumphrey, because she won't stop pampering her, she won't stop feeding her, So he thought that maybe I should get the dog out of the house. I suggested that he be hospitalized for about a fortnight. Fortnight means for 15 days or so, to be kept under observation. So I suggested that Mr. Harriet suggested that he should be hospitalized, he should be kept in the hospital for about 15 observation. The poor lady almost swooned. Swoon means fainted. She was sure he would pine and die. Pine means he'll miss his mistress a lot, and he would die if he did not see her every day. If the dog would not see Mrs. Pumphrey every day, he might die. But I took a firm line. Tricky was very ill, and this was the only way to save him. In fact, I thought it best to take him without delay. But Mr. Harriet was quite firm on his decision that if you want your pet to be alright, you have to make this sacrifice, you have to get him hospitalized. There's no way other than this, and we should do it quickly. We should get him hospitalized as soon as possible. Now, Mr. Harriet knew that the dog needs a lot of exercise and he needs a proper routine, a strict diet, which won't be possible at Mrs. Pumphrey's house. I thought it best to take him without delay, and followed by Mrs. Pumphrey's wailings. Wailings means loud cry or howl. So Mrs. Pumphrey's was upset and she didn't want to let him go, so she was crying loudly. But Mr. Harriet took the dog along with him and marched out of the car carrying the little dog wrapped in a blanket. The entire staff was roused. Staff means all the servants at Mrs. Pumphrey's house were awoken, and maids rushed in and out bringing his day bed, his night bed, favorite cushions, toys and rubber rings, breakfast bowl, lunch bowl, supper bowl. So you see, the dog Tricky had so many things, as if he's a kid of Mrs. Pumphrey's. So she used to over pamper him a lot, and he had so many things. He had a favorite cushion, he had so many toys, he had separate bowls for breakfast, lunch and supper. Now, realizing that my car would never hold all the stuff, I started to drive away. As I moved off, Mrs. Pumphrey, with a despairing cry, threw an armful of the little coats through the window. I looked in the mirror before I turned the corner. Everybody was in tears. All the staff, Mrs. Pumphrey, everybody was crying as if one of the family members is leaving for hospital. So they were so much attached and they used to love the dog so much that they were bitterly crying and they were feeling so helpless that the dog has to be hospitalized. Out on the road, I glanced down at the pathetic little animal gasping on the seat by my side. I patted the head and Tricky made a brave effort to wag his tail. Poor old lad. Lad means boy. I said, you haven't a kick in you, but I think I know a cure for you. Now, so as he was driving his car, he patted his head, Tricky's head, and he was trying to console him that okay, we'll do something about it and you'll be fine in no time. The household dogs surged round me. The household dogs, surrounded Mr. Harriet as soon as he reached his surgery or his clinic. Tricky looked down at the noisy pack with dull eyes and when put down lay motionless on the carpet. Now, Tricky was very lazy and he was not able to move, so he just lay motionless on the carpet. The other dogs, after sniffing around him, sniffing means they were smelling him like all the dogs do, for a few seconds, decided he was an uninteresting object and ignored him. Because he was lifeless, he was not moving around like them, so they thought that he's not that much interesting, so just ignored him. I made up a bed for him in a warm loose box next to the one where the other dogs slept. For 2 days, I kept an eye on him, giving him no food but plenty of water. So Mr. Harriet stopped giving him food and he was only giving him plenty of water because that was his problem. He was overfed, so he needed to cut down his diet. At the end of the second day, he started to show some interest in his surroundings, and on the third, he began to whimper. Whimper means cry or sob in a very low voice when he heard the dogs in the yard. Now, being a dog, he wanted to play along with the dogs there, but he was feeling so he started crying. When I opened the door, Tricky trotted out. Tricky rushed out and was immediately engulfed by Joe. He was surrounded by Joe, the greyhound, and his friends. Now, the dogs there, they showed some interest in Tricky and they surrounded him. After rolling him over and thoroughly inspecting him, the dogs moved off down the garden. Tricky followed them, rolling slightly with his surplus fat. Now, he made an effort to join the group of the other dogs because he wanted to play with them. He was getting bored, so he made an effort to be their friend. Later that day, I present at feeding time. I watched while Tristan is a colleague of Mr. Harriet in the surgery or in the clinic. So Mr. Tristan sloped the food into the bowls. He put the food into their bowls. There was the usual headlong rush, followed by the sounds of high-speed eating. Every dog knew that if he fell behind the others, he was liable to have some competition for the last part of his meal. Now all the dogs were eating hurriedly. Now students, we'll read the next half of the story in the second video. You have to read the story and you have to write the theme of the story and the character sketch. Thank you for watching this video.